welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. As you know, I'm your host. I'm Mary Ann Dersch. I work with nonprofit leaders to master the art of influence so they can ask for and receive all they want, need, and deserve without feeling rejected, ineffective, or pushy, because who wants to feel like that? And I'm with here with my new friend, Jenn Whitmer. And we're going to talk about managing conflict and being better at having difficult conversations. And I just met Jenn. Hi, Jenn, and welcome. And we share the same city, but we didn't know each other till now.
I know. We met last week and
I
had a great time.
It's amazing. You're the second person. I had my friend Joey Goon from Utopia, and he found me, online, and then realized we live in the same city. And not only that, of course, it's the St. Louis, so we have mutual friends.
Of course.
Right. So you help teams and leaders solve conflict, cultivate communication, and create empowered teams. Yes. You've done keynote and TEDx speaker and consultant. You talk about hard topics with infectious joy. Isn't that amazing? That is so good. People, through working with you, people improve communication, work through conflict, and build self-awareness with the Enneagram. So we're going to talk about Enneagram today a little bit too. And you ask big questions that lead to big dreams and big ideas and big living. Yes. And usually that means laughing. So I'm all of those things. Like, look at me. Like, we're like meant to have a relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're going to get into all of that. But first, I always ask my first question, which is, tell me something you're proud of that in your life, whatever part of your life you want, that you don't get to brag about a lot.
Oh, something in my life I'm proud at that I don't brag about a lot. This is kind of crazy, but we moved to St. Louis right after I graduated from college. And we didn't really know anybody in St. Louis. And so we moved from Kansas City, the other side of the state. And my husband had always wanted to live in our hometown with like a white picket fence and mow his lawn sideways, like diagonally. And I had always wanted to live overseas. So this was a little bit of our like, well, let's go somewhere. Let's do something different. And I think that was a huge moment in our lives that seemed very small at the beginning, because we were like, we're just going to stay here for a little bit and we'll go somewhere else or we'll come back home. But we're now here almost 25 years and have done all kinds of things all over the world, but making our home a different place was really a big adventure.
Yeah. Really. And feeling like you're a home here, like you're, yeah. And where did you go to school? Where did you come from?
We came from Kansas City. So we grew up in Lee Summit.
Gotcha.
I went to William Jewell in the northern part of the north of the river, and we moved here, and my husband went to Webster here in town.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. At least nobody went to Kansas. So we were driving down the street today, and my neighbors, I guess I have new neighbors, and they have a KU flag up. And I look at my son, I'm like, guess who's getting a Mizzou flag? Maybe.
Oh no. Is now the time to tell you my oldest is a KU student?
Really? Well, it was great to have you, Jenn.
I know.
Thank you for being on the Influential Nonprofit. All right. So it's okay. It's all right. I know. It happens.
It happens.
All right. Well, so speaking of conflict.
Yes, exactly.
Let's just talk about, before we get into that, I want to talk about, because I think you have a very interesting kind of origin story. How did you get into, coaching and consulting with leaders and teams? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, it's a long and twisted tale, but the short version is that I was an educator for years. I started out as a vocal music teacher and then had a lot of kids really fast. And so I stayed home for a little bit and then went back after having went back into school administration, and kind of what was my dream job. It was a small-ish private school, but we had about 300 students, which is a pretty large private school in some ways, but everybody knew each other. My kids were there, and I got to come on as this, basically an assistant head of school, and help develop teachers and do a lot of parent training, do a lot of teacher coaching. I still got to work with students some, but I really got to influence who the teachers were that were training my own kids. So it was this really neat experience that most people, unless you are homeschooling, you don't get to spend a lot of time with your kids once they go to school. And I got to be there with them and do lunch duty and recess duty and other things like that were really fun to know their friends in different ways. And I loved our mission, what we were doing of creating a space of really high academic caliber and creating high thinkers, not just fact tellers. And I loved this work. It was a diverse school, and I had probably the best leader I've ever had. And he decided to move on, as many great leaders do, and to another school. And we had an interim, and then we had a new leader that was not the best boss that I've ever had. He had his own trauma, his own lack of skill that turned what was this beautiful culture we had really worked on creating into a toxic work environment that eventually became a place of a lot of pain and incredible ineffectiveness as toxic work environments become. And I spent a lot of years trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Like, why am I the problem? And it really got me interested later on into understanding, oh, the leader is the one who really shapes things. Like, I had known that cognitively, but having experienced the difference of two leaders, one who had a lot of skill and compassion and one who didn't, that you could see the difference in the outcomes. And that the most presenting injury that kept coming up was conflict, and learning how to cope with conflict. And conflict is the surface problem. You still have to learn how to deal with it in management. But what was underneath was some lack of skill and lack of self-awareness from a leader. And that changed just everything.
There must have been a lot of grief, mourning for the loss of like something you worked so hard to create.
That is, I think that was probably the hardest thing to cope with, was actually the grief and the loss, because of also how many people it impacted. Not just I had my dream job. It was, we worked so hard to prevent this from leaking down into the rest of the organization. And eventually you can't do that. Like, it eventually works its way down. And so to see its impact over time in different children and different families and is really hard and painful.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was, I've had grief in my life, that, I mean, grandparents who've passed away, dear friends who've passed away, but this grief, this kind of ambiguous grief, was new. And learning how to walk through ambiguous grief and heal from that was a key piece in my journey in helping leaders become more self-aware, because I knew I had to do that. You can only lead as far as you've healed. And so
that is oh, you only lead as far as you healed. And that is so true. And everybody who listens to me knows I work really hard on, the healing process, and that is why, right? And the more you heal, the more you can kind of handle, and the less things bother you. But and also you're a human being, and that hurts. It hurts to see something like that. It hurts. It feels like a dam. You're trying to hold it back, and then it just kind of overflowed onto people. And for those of us who are listening to this, who are in leadership positions, knowing how important it is, like how you show up and what you put out, and the energy that you share is so important, because you set the tone, right? That leader sets the temperature. They set the personality of the organization. And it's so interesting, because even though that experience was painful, it completely illustrates it, side by side, what it's like.
Yeah.
You have a shift in leadership, and one that's effective and one that's ineffective.
And it wasn't for, I have so much compassion for that leader. It wasn't for lack of trying.
No. Everyone's doing the best they can.
Doing the best he can, tried to do all the things right. But if you don't have the inner work done, it doesn't actually matter, because you're going to make choices that are self-protective rather than good for the team, because you haven't healed enough. Like, that's just going to happen.
Right. You're protecting your own ego, your own inner child, your own wounds, instead of. And people like, this is work. Why are we talking about our inner child? And they show up everywhere. They come with you
Everywhere.
everywhere.
They come with you.
They come with you.
Absolutely.
That inner child, I work on this thing called subpersonalities, where you basically have like different parts of you, like the good girl, the rebel, da 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 da. Like I am a rebel, right? Like that's a part of me. But that part of me, like instead of trying to banish that part of me, like understanding that's just like a part of me that comes along. Like all those people, they come with you. You
Mhm.
know,
Absolutely.
one of my friends said once, when you go to work, that doesn't mean like, what do you say? You bring, it's like, it's like, she said, when, you're at the dinner table and you're fighting over the last like chicken leg or something, like when you go to work and you have a dispute with a colleague, it's like you're sitting at that dinner table, like you bringing that inner child comes with you, and it's
100%.
fighting all those fights. And if you're not aware of that, then it's really hard to navigate conflict, right? Because
Mhm.
you're assessing meaning to it that it doesn't have.
Exactly.
And we talked before, I told you in my life, especially this year, I really had to up my game and managing and navigating conflict, and not seeing it as a bad thing, right? Because like peace and conflict, it's a balance, like creating a balance. Because when we avoid conflict, we put peace on a pedestal, and sooner or later that's going to fall. So by avoiding conflict, we're actually creating more conflict,
Absolutely.
right? Instead of like the teeter totter, like, or just like there's a little peace and a little conflict. And if I can tolerate a little conflict, I'm actually creating more peace, which seems kind of crazy. But, like when you think about it, but I think a lot of really awesome nonprofit people are kind of conflict averse because we're nice,
Yes.
good, decent, kind people. We don't want to make
Yeah.
anybody mad.
Yeah. And all nonprofits have to rely on some sort of fundraising and fundraiser. And so when you add that layer to already probably a little bit of conflict averse because you're nice, that's hard.
It's
That's
hard.
really
It
challenging.
can be hard. Yes.
It
Mhm.
can be hard. Well, you have to work through it. Like
Mhm.
if you don't work through it, you remain small and ineffective. And the way that I often describe it is that if you avoid conflict, you manufacture fake peace. And there's a lot of us
Mm.
running around with fake peace where it's actually keeping us small, it's not nearly as effective, and we're expending twice as much energy to get half as much done. And it's because we're doing all this work to avoid conflict. And that is just a fake peace that you're trying to maintain, and it's terrible for everybody.
You're speaking my language. Oh my God. I feel so seen. I feel so seen. Oh my God. And I know this resonates with people. I know it does. I know it does. So tell me, how do you help people, you know, be at peace with more conflict?
Yeah. Well, it's really, first of all, knowing that you're normal, that conflict feels scary. Like it is like probably 2% of the people in the world really love conflict. And I joke that they're all on Twitter, like that's where like they really love it. They head for it. But even those folks who like head into conflict, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're handling it well. So just know that everybody's got some sort of feeling about conflict. And that doesn't mean you can't get good at it. It just means that you have to recognize that's how you feel about it and then choose what you want to do. So having those emotions doesn't mean you're bad. And it also doesn't mean that you can't be skilled at learning conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is first a posture, and then it is a set of skills. So the posture of conflict resolution is always, it's problem solving. It's the two of us together against the problem out there. That's how we
Mm.
solve conflict. Then, oh, now I have to get better at those particular problem solving skills, and I need to get better at team building skills. That feels very different than I got to learn how to win an argument. That's not what we're after. So learning how to have that posture of we're together, the two of us, the six of us, whatever, whoever we are, we're together on a team, and we've got a problem out there we're trying to solve. Not I'm fighting against you and you're fighting against me. That's ineffective.
Um, so when you said like, or when you work with organizations and like, and you said, what comes up the most is like solving conflict, right? Is
Mhm.
that is that what typically comes up when you're doing like an assessment or when you're working with organizations, or does it come out in like some other way?
Sometimes they recognize it. They're like, goodness, we're having all kinds of conflict and we don't know how to solve it. If they've gotten to that point, it's usually other things have, I mean, always other things have happened beforehand. Sometimes people come and they're like, we're just, things don't seem off. We don't seem cohesive. We don't seem like our employees are engaged, or they're struggling to communicate with one another, or they're struggling to communicate with clients or donors. And the communication thing is often what people say, because sometimes it's really scary to admit, goodness, we're not good at solving conflict. Like that's hard to admit. And sometimes they don't even know. And so, but communication, they're like, we just don't seem to be jiving, or like we're having a lot of miscommunication. That is often where people assess themselves. And usually in that case, there is some kind of cultural misalignment and lack of skill around conflict resolution. Those two things are usually what come out.
So when you say cultural misalignment, what does that look like?
So that looks like a few different ways. One is we have no clear values, or our values are just on the wall somewhere, and they're not actually operationalized into our systems, into our processes, and how we relate to one another. We say this, it's on the wall, but that we just kind of keep going, and those are pretty pictures. So, I mean, especially in nonprofit spaces, a lot of times there's this great vision. I mean, everybody wants this vision, and there's a mission to get there. And then sometimes there's core values, but there's not always like value statements. Here's what that core value looks like in practice in our world and how we maintain it. That level of alignment is what you want. Oftentimes there's this misalignment between when there's a lack of clarity around what the values are. The what I call explicit culture, here's what we say that we do, is misaligned with the implicit culture. Here's what we actually do.
Right.
When those two things are misaligned, everybody feels it and conflict happens. That's what I
Everybody
mean
feels
by
it. And I call that, I think out of alignment, right? Like what we say and what we do are two different things, right? And I love how you described that. So brilliant, explicit and implicit. And people know it, and they often don't have language for it. So like if an
Exactly.
organization's like, oh, we value, strong families, and yet they work their people so hard that the people quit because they have no time to spend with their family. That's not valuing
Exactly.
strong families, right? Oh, these families, sure, we value, but these families, like, no, you value, like, this is what we value, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, and when I think that happens, there's a lack of trust, right? And when there's a lack
Absolutely.
of trust, then there becomes like suspicion. And as everything is built on a foundation of trust, and people see that, but they often don't have, I feel like they don't have the language to say it, but they know it is true. Like we're not who we say we are. And how can you stand in value of someplace that's not who they say they are? And also knowing like everyone's doing their best, like, right? Like I'm
Totally.
not like,
Yeah.
everyone's, this is just where they're at. And or maybe they just lost their way a little bit. And I feel like that is so important. And I'm so glad you said that, because what you say and what you do have to be as close as possible. It doesn't, we're not perfect. It doesn't have to be 100%, but as
Absolutely.
close as
We'll
possible.
never be perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
And always working towards greater mastery of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the other thing about kind of like the miscommunication, like for me, that shows up in what I call cleanup conversations. So people are wind up having miscommunication, and then somebody's got to go in and then clean it up. Right? They spend a lot of time navigating small disputes that they wish people could have handled themselves. Right? And then they got to go in and clean it up.
And that's why I think lots of people, miscommunication is the thing that they identify as part of the issue. And some of those cleanup conversations are fine. Like things change and we realize, oh, that we didn't communicate clearly in the moment. Or you send the conference report later and people are like, wait, that's not what I thought we agreed to. And that's okay, because not every conflict or miscommunication can be solved in one conversation.
Right.
But getting clear at the beginning and starting with your values, know what your goals are and where you're going, and being curious about what the other person's goals are and where they're going, that will get you so much further into clear communication than coming in with, here's exactly how we're going to do it. Right? Great. We left and everybody's like, wait, what just happened?
Wait, what?
and
Wait,
now
what?
there's, yeah, then you've got cleanup conversations that are unhelpful and unproductive.
Right.
And that's not what we're going for.
Um, it's, I like what you said about like the shared goals. So how, like, give me a story I would love to hear a story or an example of, you know, of this work, i- uh, like a case statement or a story that you have to share.
Yeah. So I was working one time with a local retirement community type place. They had just been um, purchased by a larger place, but they still had all of this autonomy, but they were trying to figure out how do they align with the new set of values that were basically just given to them, but they didn't have a lot of support from this corporate entity. They had to do it all themselves. And so I came in and we talked about, well, what are your values? And then here's the really important thing. We got around and we had post-it notes around the wall. Clearly, I like post-it notes. And we defined terms. And somebody were like, because one of their core values is respect. Well, there were 16 different definitions of respect by the time we got to that post-it note, because everybody felt like that looked like something different. And so coming to agreements about what does this word mean as a core value. And then the next step is always, well, what does that look like? And so then I came in, and once this leadership team really decided, then I came in and we talked with staff, like, here's what this means. What does this mean to you? And involving stakeholders in that conversation, and then training on how do we do that? If one of their values was care, well, what does that mean and how we communicate with one another? Especially in a place that has really transient staff and a wide
Mm,
variety of people. You've got office staff and you've got food service workers who are like high school students. Like, what does that look like? And how do you communicate consistently care? What does that even look like? And so we really spent time with that. And what came out of that was one of my favorite comments was, I got an email like a week later from one of the participants who was one of the managers of the food service section. And he sent me this message. He's like, okay, so this person came in late and I tried what you did, and oh my gosh, it actually worked.
right.
I was like, amazing. Tell me more. And he was like, I would have been so upset. I would have come in and just started assigning demerits. Instead, I asked a question. They remembered how to respond. And we had this great conversation about it and solved a problem that I didn't know existed in the way I can't remember exactly, but the way their system worked. And it was amazing. And it was like, I never would have stopped to ask a question. I just would have, here's the rule, this is how we follow directions. But because we talked about care, connecting that to communication and curiosity, it changed how they operated. And that becomes incredibly more efficient. As you're talking about, nobody wants to have these back end cleanup conversations of, well, you've been late this many times. Well, why didn't we talk about it the first time you were late? Is this just a one-off situation? Is there something blocking this for you? Can we fix it? Like looking at it like a problem solver and an innovator rather than a disciplinarian was a very different concept for them. And that changed how they started to operate with each other, made everything more efficient. And then employees are like, oh, you actually do what you say. You say that you care
Mm-hmm.
about me, but you actually do care about me. And that makes them more engaged and more committed. You get less turnover. All of that starts to happen. Of course, the high school student's going to graduate, but still there's other components of people that are, oh, this is a good place to work. You should go
Right.
here. And then you get higher
Right.
quality
So we talk
employees.
about respect or care. What does that really mean? How does that show up? Right. And I love your story, because I feel like when we open this conversation and talking about that inner child, like that's the child who took control and in what didn't happen. Like, you get to marriage, blah 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 blah. Like I have to control because I'm
Yeah.
feeling weak. And if I feel
Mm-hmm.
weak, then I feel powerless. So I need to feel powerful and it's an ego thing. And it's, which is fine. We all have an ego. I'm just saying, like, when the ego takes control and and we think something's happening to us, right? And that person is doing something to us, and then we're going to react that way. instead of like taking a step back, giving a little like opening the window for grace to come in and then say, oh, hey, what's going on? What's happening with this? Hey, let's
Yeah.
solve it together. And then we all learn, and now we have a better system in mind. And that's when we talk about like self-aware leadership. It's like I am choosing my response, right? Like it's not choosing me.
Mhm.
It's not getting a hold of
Exactly.
me.
Exactly. I mean, I will die on this hill that you cannot lead anybody else until you lead yourself. Like you
100%.
have to lead yourself first. And the way that I help people frame that is, and self-leadership involves ruthless self-honesty. It has to be ruthless about who you are and what your goals are, whether that's the inner child or that rebel, whoever is coming up in your ego, ruthlessly. What is happening? And generous self-compassion. They're trying the best that they are. You are trying the best that you are. And the way you get to marry those two together is curiosity. What might be happening in me? How am I responding here? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? What's happening for me? How am I approaching this? Like getting curious about yourself rather than shaming, because shaming will lead you to this like
Yes.
tight control that
Yes.
doesn't help anybody. And
Guilt and
you're not.
shame. That's the thing we all don't want to feel, right? Is
Yeah.
guilt and
Yeah.
shame. And that's a huge driver towards behavior, that if you're not
Mhm.
aware of it, you're going to be doing, not saying them because you're ashamed, right? And even when I'm talking about why I do what I do is, I was just having a conversation earlier today about like, because if you're afraid, like, oh, we want our nonprofits to market more transparent and be vulnerable, like, okay, but if that but they tend to want perfection. I want it to be
Mhm.
perfect, right? Because I don't feel confident. And if I'm less than perfect, somebody's going to see it. If some Then they're going to know my real truth. And my real truth is I
Right.
am I am an imposter. You didn't know I have no qualifications. I feel horrible. Like that's that part of them that's coming up. And so no amount of marketing, I could give you the most perfect message, is going to work if you're afraid to be seen, if you're afraid to be visible, if you're afraid of receiving that level of anything. So it's
Yeah,
important to understand that like that guilt and shame can really stop a lot of things from happening, and even a marketing campaign, right?
absolutely.
Because if
Well, it
it,
affects
it
everything
right, it
because
affects everything.
we're whole people living whole lives.
Hmm.
And when we're getting curious about ourselves, yes, we can dissect and kind of figure out what's happening. But as you said, like it's integrated. I'm not like sitting on the couch doing Netflix while I'm talking to you right now. Like
Right.
we're whole people. I'm
We're whole
here.
people. Yes.
And everything comes with us and we get to decide what that wholeness looks like, but we're so much better when we choose wholeness rather
Yes.
than compartmentalization.
Right. And like, oh, I'm this way at work and this way not. Honey,
You're the same.
you're the
I,
same.
I got news.
How you show up one place is how you show up every place.
Yep.
And sometimes work is a great way to start working on these things, because these are more defined relationships. But like in my world, this is what I talk about. My coaches talk about like family's the Olympics. So typically, like the more you know somebody, the harder it can be. Like, I had
Yeah.
a big thing with my sister. I was like devastated. I forgot everything,
Uh-huh.
like
Totally.
right. And because so we're not perfect, but we're working on it, right? And
Yeah.
we're learning from it, and because we're open to it. And when you can be open to that, that's what creates a really powerful leader.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want
Yeah.
to shift for a second, real quick, because you talk about the Enneagram. So, what do you love about this, and how does it help you?
Yeah. Well, it's totally tied into what we were just talking about. So if you're saying Ennea what, and you're like, this is the first time you've heard it, nope, don't worry. I'll explain it. The Enneagram is a personality framework, and it shows us what are these deep motivations we think, act, and feel the way we do. So what I love about the Enneagram is that it teaches us that the ego, the psyche, personality, whatever word you want to put there, in this instance, they all really mean the same thing, how it is trying to protect us and get those needs met, that deep why. And so there are 9 types and they each have a different motivation. And so if we're walking into a circumstance where you are motivated to make sure you're not being controlled and I am motivated to avoid pain, our thinking and feeling and actions are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting to understand that why, that what is motivating me, helps us actually calm our personalities. Because when our personalities get super activated, it's your ego. And so
Right.
it can have like a vice grip on the steering wheel of your life. And that's not, your personality is then running the show rather than you running your show, and
Right.
trying to let that back off. So the Enneagram is a personality tool that I think helps us understand how to start releasing the grip of our personality and allowing our true whole good selves out in a way that is beneficial for us in the world.
That's
And so that's what
amazing.
I really love about it.
Yeah. I was just saying to you, I don't know this system as well as I want to, but I am a 5. But I did take the test because so many people use it, so I do want to get familiar with it. So
Uh-huh.
I'm glad I'm learning
Yeah.
from you, because I use a system called wealth dynamics or talent dynamics and then
Mhm.
strengths finder. It's
Yeah,
all designed to just build self-awareness, right? It's
absolutely. I
all
love
designed to give
self-awareness
us a
stuff.
new window into understanding ourselves and our motivations.
Yeah. What I love about, so I have a framework that I use to describe the different personality tools because they all have a slightly different function. But I think strengths finders I put at the top of the pyramid, because I think it's one of the easiest to start understanding yourself.
Yes.
And you like, it's often people's first foray into, oh, what am I actually naturally good at? That sometimes is hard to see. And that, how does that help me? And the thing about the Enneagram is that it really shows us that the best parts of us that have turned into our strengths are often also the worst parts of us that hold us back. And we have to, that it shows us that dynamic. So the strengths finders at the top of that pyramid. And then there's like DISC and Colby that shows us a lot of our patterns. And then we've got the other ones that you were just talking about with Myers-Briggs that talk about our preferences that are
Mm-hmm.
harder to change, and harder to see. And then underneath all of that is the foundation of the Enneagram. Because if
Gotcha.
what I'm doing is because of a motivation, I'm going to get a preference about it. And then if I do something over and over and over again, I'm going to develop a pattern. And if I develop a pattern that works really well, it's going to become a strength. And so they work
Gotcha.
together in this nice symbiotic way. But for me, the thing that has been the most effective in actually bringing change has been using that Enneagram understanding of our motivation.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay. All right. Well, I think anything that helps you gain more self-awareness is a good thing. And also, I use a system called Wealth Dynamics, and I would love for you to tell me, this is your homework, Jen. I want to know where that
Oh,
system fits into all of this.
find
Not a lot of people use
it.
it, but that's the system that I use that I found great meaning in. All right. Now I have to bring up something with you.
Oh no.
Obviously, we are connected at the soul level because you really just want your life to be a musical. Here's 3 things that we need to know. You really want your life to be musical. Yeah, mine is.
Okay.
Um,
I mean,
Ted
I've made mine a
Lasso.
musical.
Hmm?
I've made mine a musical.
Ted Lasso might just be the most perfect show. Pretty close, and you are a loud laugher. Me, so yes, we are aligned. So, you said that you were a vocal teacher.
I was, yes.
So you're a singer, performer, musical
That is how
person.
I, yeah, that's how I started my career. I was a vocal music teacher for a K-8 building. I love my junior high kids. In fact, the favorite class that I ever taught was a group of about 60, 65 7th and 8th grade boys who didn't choose to be in band or orchestra, which meant by default they were in choir. And I loved those kids. It was probably my favorite class I ever taught.
All right. So now this is my last question, is going to be an easy one then,
Oh, I don't
because
know. I'm scared.
well, no, this is my last question for everybody. This is going to be perfect for you. So I love karaoke, and
Mm.
it's my favorite. So and it's like the best form of creative self-expression ever. Fight me. And speaking of conflict, and so if you and I, which we could be very easily, we
Wow.
live in the same city, wound up at a karaoke bar together, what is your go-to number?
I would have to say it's This Is Me, Kira Settle from The Greatest Showman.
Oh yes.
I would choose that one. And then I
Yes.
might choose The Rose by Bette Midler. I mean, it's just so gorgeous.
Yes.
Um, I could have a whole list, but I would say those would be my top two. Very
I did
different
that. I
fields.
did the Rose in like freshman choir.
Oh yeah,
So I'm dating
totally.
myself.
Oh, I'll date myself. I was in school. I was in elementary school, but still, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
And okay, and I love This Is Me. That's a belter too. So I love that song is amazing. That and there's been a couple of different versions of it, but it's really good.
In fact, my favorite line in the movie is actually not sung by Kara Settle. It's sung by the young the small Tom Thumb general character. But it is, I'm not going to let the same sink in. I just love that line. And it's like, nope, you can, all the arrows you want. I'm not going to let the shame sink in. It's so good.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great way to end this conversation. Thank you, Jen. Now, we're going to put your contact info and everything in the show notes, but how can people get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a free resource if people are interested in learning more about the Enneagram called Why Do I Keep Doing This? So if you go to jennwhitmer.com/freebies, you can grab that there. You can see whatever my latest workshop is. And I always love people coming to say hi. I play the most on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you can find me on those two places, Jenn_Whitmer on Instagram. But when you scroll to the bottom, my website at jennwhitmer.com, 2 N's, you can click the little icons that take you to the right places.
Yeah, and that's how we met on LinkedIn. So
yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. And this is it for this episode of the Influential Nonprofit. As always, if you haven't yet, you can go to theinfluentialnonprofit.com and download your Uplevel Your Influence Starter Kit, where I have a ton of cool guides and a great actually template for how to have a conversation, how to have it's called Courageous Conversations. It's a template on how to have a conversation a different way based in listening and finding common ground. And that is in there if you want to download that at theinfluentialnonprofit.com. Jenn, thank you again. I'm sure we'll be connecting soon, and we'll see you next time.